Constance W. Kihm was a buyer for several major clothiers for many years. Mrs. Kihm decided to pursue a degree when her children were grown. She graduated from Towson State University with a degree in English with secondary education in 1995. Mrs. Kihm worked as a substitute teacher for a year and then returned to retailing. These are her reflections.
Mrs. Kihm, thank you for coming in and sharing your thoughts about your professional career, your degree work here at Towson, your preparation to become a teacher, and the rest of the story. This will add greatly to our understanding of teacher education across time at Towson University. I guess the best place to begin is at the beginning. So if you would tell us a little bit about your early social context, where you grew up, what you were interested in, what you were thinking as you went through high school. That might be a good place to start.
I grew up in a small town in Ohio, Zanesville. Probably at one point, Zanesville, Ohio was the pottery capital of the world. Places like Roseville and Shawnee and all of those things that people collect were, because of the clay around Zanesville, that was where it was manufactured. Until 1950, when, and I was born in 46, so until 1950 when they found out that they could do it better in Japan and cheaper and so on. But this little town had 2 Catholic churches, and I was raised Catholic, and I went to Catholic grade school. 60 children in my first grade class, and Sister Aloysius had us all well behaved. We all knew how to sit with our hands folded and so on. That was probably my first No, I went to kindergarten to a public school. But in this little town, my dad was a banker, and my mother remarried. My natural father died when I was 14 months old, and then my mother remarried a couple of years after that, and I have brothers and sisters, but he's the only dad I know. So dad was a banker, and at some point we moved out to a small farm, and because he figured he had to feed these 5 children. I was the oldest of, and then 4 siblings. And so I went to Catholic school, and then for high school, it was a co-ed high school. So these 2 churches, because there weren't enough Catholics to support a girls' school and a boys' school, we had a co-ed Catholic school. We didn't wear uniforms and so on. And we had some marvelous teachers. Nuns get a bad rap, I think, but high school nuns were good. Some of them were a little crazy, but I really cherished Sister Kristen, my high school English teacher, and everybody always talks about their high school English teacher. She had been a Rockette prior to joining the convent. She had legs that, were clear up to here. She was wonderful. And I remember Beowulf, and when I get together with my high school classmates, we still talk about her and what we learned in her class. Many of the girls from that class went on to become English majors. And I think, and then we had Sister Jane Francis, who was a different order of nuns, but she also was a high school English teacher, and I will never forget her crying at the end of Tale of Two Cities. I mean, this all these years down the road, and I still remember that. So I thought I would be a nurse. So after high school, and I met a lovely young man while I was in high school there, and we dated, and he went off to college, and I thought I would be a nurse, so I went to nursing school in Columbus, Ohio. And at the end of a year, we got married. Now, that's unique, because we got married and decided that it was important that Jim get his college degree. So we moved to Miami University in Oxford, Ohio, where he was matriculating. And I became a stay-at-home mom. I had a little girl and stayed at home. And years later, our daughter asked me, well, Mother, why didn't you go to school when Dad was in school? Remember the time. This was 1966, 67, 68. And I talked to some girls that Jim graduated with when we went back for his 40th reunion. And I told them my story, that I was there and I was pregnant and then had a baby and then was a stay-at-home mom. And they told me I was invisible to them, that at that time in university life, there was no such thing as married students, or very few, especially undergrad, and a pregnant girl in a class was just unheard of. I did not exist in the purview of those co-eds. But we had a nice life, and Gretchen was born at McCullough Hyde Hospital in Oxford, Ohio. And so we moved then after he graduated, and I was so proud of him, very supportive of him. As a matter of fact, at one point I wrote a paper on infrared spectroscopy. He was an organic chemistry major. So I wrote this paper on infrared spectroscopy, which was absolutely plagiarized from the book he gave me. And I got a B on the paper, which was wonderful. Yeah, I was excited.
Well, how was it that you managed to live? If you were a stay-at-home mom and he was a student, had he gotten a scholarship or something that made this happen?
No. Now remember, we're in the 60s, so the tuition
Right.
and books and so on. Our rent was $90 a month, and in the summer, he worked at a foundry in Zanesville. We would go back, lived with his parents,
see.
and then he worked at a foundry and would make $2,000 or $3,000, and that amount of money was enough for us to live on. We didn't have a television. I mean, it was when we were first married, we couldn't afford a television, so we didn't have one, and we didn't care. It didn't matter. My dad gave us a car, so we had a car, and gasoline was 25 cents a gallon, so you could get by on whatever Jim made that summer. Now, and this is important because remember, I'm not working at all. Have not worked.
Right.
And I'm now 20 years old, 22 years old, and okay, because this comes up later. And so after he graduated, we moved to Cincinnati. His first job was in Cincinnati. And he got a job working for a chemical company. And I got pregnant again because we wanted another child. And so I'm still a stay-at-home mom. And then he decided to go for his master's at Xavier. So I don't see him at all. He works all day and then goes to school at night, and I don't see him at all. And in 2 years, he gets his master's. We have Greg, and it was a nice time of our life. But now remember, all I'm doing is caring for children, and
Right.
I'm learning how to play bridge with the neighborhood ladies and that sort of thing. Gretchen was still too young to go to school. We moved to New Jersey. We live in Jersey for 18 months, which is about as long as we could take it. We didn't care for New Jersey much at all. And then Jim found this job in Baltimore, Cockeysville, actually. And we were delighted to move to Maryland. We thought that was just great. Now, by this time, that's 1973. We moved to Maryland in 1973. Gretchen starts second grade, and Greg is a year from going to kindergarten. The following year, well, during this time, it's dawning on me that if anything happens to my husband, I have absolutely no marketable skills. How will I take care for these children? Yes, we had life insurance, but that wouldn't provide for the rest of our lives.
Right.
I mean, I knew how to do nothing. And that was really of a concern to me. Not that I thought anything would happen to Jim, and luckily he's still alive today, but at that time, you didn't know that.
Right.
So the day that Gregory went to elementary school, I had my purse in my hand, and I got in my car and I went and got a job. And the job I got was I drove to the corner of York and Warren Roads in Cockeysville, and there's a tire place there now, but at that time it was a log cabin with a house built around it and a huge buckeye tree in front, and it was called the Jolly Winemaker Shop. And I went in and I asked the gentleman, Osborne Ryder, don't know if he's still alive, but he was a great guy, did he ever need any help? That I didn't know really how to do anything, but I was a quick learner. And I thought whatever was there, I could probably learn to do. And he said, well, as a matter of fact, yes. He said I could use like a Gal Friday. And so that was my first job. And I was delighted with it. And he would work around my schedule with the children coming home from school and so on. So that worked out really well until he went out of business.
Oops.
Yeah, it was sad. But he was selling winemaking supplies.
I see.
And yeah, I learned how to make wine. One of my little known facts is that I was interviewed by Oprah Winfrey before she was Oprah. She had a show called People Are Talking, and they did a little feature on people making wine, and she came out, and Osborne didn't want to do it, so I said I'd do it. And so I was interviewed by Oprah before she was Oprah. Yeah. And then I went to a department store. There was a department store in Timonium called Stewart's, and I thought, well, I'll just go there. Now I have at least, I have something. I have a couple of years of something that I've done.
You have work experience.
A little bit, right. And I knew that Osborne would be very good about giving me references and so on. So I went there, and it was a neighbor that was the manager that lived in the same housing development that we lived in, and he said, yeah, he would hire me. So I get hired as a sales clerk for nights and weekends, because that works out well. Jim can watch the children nights and weekends. I'm home during the day when they're in school. Good plan. So I'm working one day, and this woman comes in, the buyer. I didn't even know what a buyer was, had no idea how that stuff got on the floor. All I knew is I had to sell it and keep it straight and so on. So she comes in, and she's the buyer, and she wants to change the floor around. So we're moving racks and taking armloads of merchandise and putting them on different things, and I'm helping her. I'm pretty energetic. So the next day, the phone rings when I'm at work, and she said, had I considered a career in retailing? And I said, I beg your pardon? And she said, well, I'm looking for an assistant buyer. And she said, although you have no skills, she said, you have the attitude. And I think my attitude has gotten me through a lot of things in life. I think I've advanced myself because I have a pretty positive attitude. So I said, well, I don't know. I said, I'd have to check. And she said, well, is school a problem? And I said, well, my children are in, and she said, your children, she thought I was a college student. Oh. And I was very, yeah.
How old were you?
Late 20, or like 26, 27, so yeah.
Sure.
So we went home and had a family meeting. I went home and set the children down, and we had a family meeting. And we explained, this is, all day, 9 to 5. Of course, no salaried job is ever 9 to 5. But, and Jim and I made the decision at that point that we also wouldn't use the money that I made for living expenses. In other words, we wouldn't put it, we were getting along fine on his salary. So we would use this for extras. So the children thought that was a good idea, because the first thing we did with it was take them to Disney World.
Okay.
And so I was downtown, working downtown at Stewart's, and I was there for 6 weeks, and this lady that I was working for quits and goes across the street to the rival department store, Hutzler's. Now I'm 6 weeks into being an assistant buyer, and of course I have no training for this other than what I'm getting there. But I am a pretty quick learner, so I picked it up, and within 3 months, they made me the buyer. Kind of being, that's being in the right place at the right time. So I was a buyer for Stewart's for a couple of years, and wonderful experiences there. One of the best ones that I love this story. I had a blouse. I was the blouse buyer, and one of my vendors in New York, his mother lived in Pikesville and had a handbag shop in Pomona Square. So she and I became friendly, and I just liked her. And she was engaged to a man in New York, and she was going to get married. And she invited us to come. He was in real estate. She told me he was and I figured he was a slumlord in New York. And she said, well, he's having a party New Year's Eve. Would you like to come? And I said, well, yeah, Joe and I would come up. The kids were old enough to stay by themselves at that time. And I said, where's it going to be? And she said, 1 Times Square. That's the building where the ball comes down with Dick Clark.
There you go. Yeah.
It was remarkable. I've always wanted to be at Times Square for New Year's Eve. Well, this was wonderful. We were in the building, so we could see all the, it was remarkable. And lots of good things happened. I traveled a lot. I was in New York 1 week out of every month. And so in the meantime, in the 2 years that I'm staying at Stewart's, this young lady gets promoted from buyer at Hutzler's to merchandise manager. So she's got an opening for a buyer. She hires me across the street. So I followed her, and now I'm a buyer at Hutzler's. And so I did that for a while until they went out of business. Now you'll notice that Jim is now calling me the Black Widow, because it seems like wherever I go, these companies are failing. And it doesn't bode well. Yeah. So after Hutzler's closed, I kind of I worked for Epstein's. That was a local department store. I worked for them for a couple of years. They also went out of business. And I was just at 6s and 7s. I just didn't know what to do or what I was going to do. And Jim said, you've always wanted to go to college. And he said, why don't you try that? Well, by this time, now I've had this giant career in retailing. I'm in my mid-40s. Right. So I said, Jim, if I go to college now, I'll be almost 50 years old by the time I graduate. And he said, you're going to be 50 years old in 5 years anyway. You may as well do something you want to do.
Right. And are the kids now out of the house? Or?
Gretchen has graduated college, and Greg is at Penn State, so which was another benefit from my working. my whole career, when it was time to send the kids to school, Jim was going to go into the IRA or whatever he'd been saving. And I said, you don't have to do that. I had 2 college educations saved up. And what we gave our children for college was debt, no debt.
Wonderful.
Well, yes, except then our daughter married somebody that had debt, but.
Well, that wasn't of your making.
Right. She paid that off. So conveniently, we were living in Cockeysville, and there was Towson, and a friend of mine was going to take a psych course here, and I said, okay, it was a night course. I said, all right, I'll sign up with that. That sounds fun. So I signed up and took Psych 101. Because you don't know if your brain, I mean, I knew my business. I knew how to be a buyer. I knew how to write a business plan. I knew how to do an open to buy. I knew how to do a budget. But I didn't know anything about psychology or English or, I knew what I knew.
You didn't know about college.
At all. I didn't. And I mean, even being with my husband while he was going through it.
It's not the same.
It isn't the same. It was, I mean, I could see what he was doing, but I'm not doing it. Except for that one paper, of course. That I got a B on. So I took this Psych 101, and I got an A. And I was excited because it was like, it's sort of like validation. When you work, you get a paycheck. But nobody says, rarely does somebody say, boy, you really did a nice job on that report or on that thing you did. Hardly. You might hear, oh, hey, that was a good, but it's not this. You get the paper that says, look how good you did. Boy, did I like that. That was exciting. So then I thought, well, maybe I'll take 2 courses next. Now, at this time, I have no idea how to even enroll in college. I know nothing. All I know is I took 1 course, which was easy enough. You just went to the admin building and signed up for it, and that was easy. And so now I'm going to take 2, and I'm going to take comp. I took English comp and writing for business. I took those both, I think, at the same time. And I'm not sure about that second one, but I signed up for them still with absolutely no idea about how long is this going to take, how many courses do you need, what am I going to study? But again, it's just getting my feet wet. Well, that did it. My English comp course was wonderful. I often tell people that I have opinions about, by the time you're 45 years old, you have opinions about everything. Now somebody's got to read them. You have to write them down. Kids would complain in my class about having to write papers, and I'm like, no, you don't get it. They've got to read what I say here. I thought,
a built-in audience.
It was great. And I wrote papers about everything. And people, and then they would say, and 3 pages long, and I'd go, oh no, only 3 pages? And which is so contrary to what most students.
Right.
But again, I'm in a different place now.
Exactly.
Yeah. And a 3-page report's hardly anything. I mean, when you're working, a 3-page report, you can't even begin to say anything. So then I decided, I made an appointment. I remember this distinctly. I made an appointment at the admin building with someone to give me some guidance as to what do I do now.
Right. Well, have you been admitted to a bachelor's degree program or anything?
No.
No.
At this point, I'm only taking courses.
As a non-degree student.
Now, this is in the early 90s. So as a non-degree student.
Right.
And then, because I was scared to death I was going to have to take the SATs.
Oh.
And I'm like, I couldn't, I mean, after being out of high school for 25 years, you can't go back and take the SATs. You would fail dismally. So in the 90s, and I don't know how it is now, but if you took, there were like, if you had 12 hours of coursework,
right,
then you could apply for admission as a degree student. So that was what this person helped me with and gave me this paper with the GURs, which are now called core requirements. Then they were undergrad requirements.
Right.
Yeah.
And then they were gen eds, a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
They've had.
Yeah, and they still have them, right?
Yes.
Okay. Because you had to take, some humanities and sciences and arts, and it was wonderful. I thought that was a great.
It's your liberal arts.
It was great. Because then you get to taste everything. I mean, and Jim would laugh, my husband would laugh when I would go home. He would say, I'd take a computer course, and then I'd want to get a degree in computers. And then I would take a biology course. Maybe I'll get a degree in biology. I had no idea. All I knew was that I was loving this experience. And so then once I signed up, after I got my 12 hours, then I signed up to be a degree student. But at that point, I didn't have to declare a major.
Right.
So I still am just working through this sheet of paper, and they even, it doesn't matter if you were 45, they still made me take phys ed, which I thought was really funny.
Yep.
I took water aerobics, which was fun. It was fun. And in the meantime, I'm meeting great people, students as well as faculty. I think my fear, if there was a fear or any kind of trepidation, was they're going to look at me funny because they've all got 18-year-olds. You know, this is all 18 and 19-year-olds,
right.
And here's this 45-year-old woman. Well, the faculty doesn't look at it like that at all, which I didn't realize. I mean, I was kind of a little nervous going in, but I always sat in the same seat in every class because I am blind in my left eye. So I always would sit in the front left-hand chair. Jim always said, sit in the front. He's giving me advice as a 40-year-old. Sit in the front and raise your hand if you know the answer. He said that's what he would tell the kids. And so I did. That was the front left, and I would raise my hand if I knew the answer. And most professors liked that.
Yes.
Instead of teaching to a mute bunch of 18-year-olds. And sometimes the kids would then answer me. I mean, I would get it started. If I said something, then they wouldn't feel so shy about speaking out, because they found out that I wasn't, you know, they don't hit you if you get it wrong. And so it was wonderful. I was meeting these great people, and I was having a wonderful time. And the first year that I went full-time, our son was a senior at Penn State. And so this was tough because my husband would post my grades on the refrigerator, and I was doing way better at Towson than he was doing at Penn State. Although, remember, he's a traditional age student, and he was also studying electrical engineering, Russian, and computer sciences.
There you go.
Yeah, he wasn't. But to PS onto him, he then got his master's at Hopkins and got a 4 point. So, you know, things do, when they pay for it themselves,
Right.
it changes. So after the first 2 years, when I had all my GURs done, I loved the English department, loved it. I took a course, my early British literature from Dr. Newman, and I just, oh my gosh, she's talking about all this stuff that's just exciting, and the three parts of man and how everything sort of blends around. It sort of all just clicked on stuff that I had been reading all my life. And I just, it was exciting. So I thought, well, maybe English, because I loved English in high school, so I probably still love English. So then I had George Friedman, and that did it. He was the best. He was like being taught, I say this, and I mean absolutely no respect to Dr. Friedman at all. It was like being taught by Woody Allen. He was wonderful. He had a sense of humor, a very dry, wonderful sense of humor, and yet a way of getting the message across. He was brilliant in his subject material. He knew it inside and out, and very good about getting it across. All you had to do was show up. If you showed up, you got it. I also loved my Shakespeare class. I had Dr. James Hill for Shakespeare tragedies. I did not take comedies. I only liked tragedies, and he was funny. In the 4 years that I went to Towson, I never missed a class because I was paying for it. So why would you miss? It's my nickel. Except I was getting a business minor. So you had to stand, in those days before computers, remember, this is the early 90s, you had to go and stand in line to get permits. And you would get in line at 6, 7 o'clock in the morning, and they would open up at 8. Well, I had my tragedies class was 8 a.m. So they told me I was in line for my permit, that Dr. Hill was going up and down the halls yelling, "Constance, where are you?" Because I was never not there.
Right.
They were afraid something was wrong with me. But I loved him. I thought we had to write a paper in that class, and I wanted it to be something that no one had ever written about Shakespeare before.
Whoa.
Yeah, I knew I was going to come up with the thing that I was going to have this flash that nobody had ever had before. So I walked for exercise, and I was walking around our neighborhood, and all of a sudden it came to me. I raced home. I wrote down my thesis statement, could not wait to the next day to get there and show it to Dr. Hill. And I showed it to him. It was Cordelia in King Lear as a Christ figure. And he said, yes, there have been books written about it. But that eureka moment, I mean, that was satisfying enough to me, even though I found out that,
other people had had that thought too.
I wasn't quite as brilliant as I thought I was. But then my husband says to me, all right, now you're getting this wonderful degree in English. What are you going to do with it? Well, there were 3 tracks: literature track, writing track, and education track. I love literature, but what am I going to do with it? And writing, I love to read, and I like to write, but I'm not a great writer. You just know how good you are. And I'm adequate, competent, but not great, not good, not enough. I mean, I'm never going to be published. I've had one poem ever published, and it was in the Grub Street, and it was about the little room that we had over in Linthicum. Yeah, that's my little, that was my little.
We'll have to track that down.
Yeah, it's in the Grub Street. It was about the characters that when we formed the English Club. Oh, that's something I should talk about too, the English Club. But to finish up, I decided education. I can teach. If I can learn, I can probably teach. Now, I've really not had any experience. All of my work history gives me training. I mean, I would train my assistants and so on, but never like teaching a room of children or young adults. But so I did. It took a little longer because you have to take all the education courses, and then I was also getting this business minor because of all the years I spent in business. Seemed to a waste. I didn't want to waste that. I may as well. That could always come in handy for something. Plus, I loved being here. And I went in the summer. I audited Dr. Friedman's, one of Dr. Friedman's summer classes, and he said to me, oh, 2/3 of the way through, why aren't you taking this class for credit? And it was some American short story or something. I don't care much for American literature. And I even did a presentation at the end and I was taking it for no credit. I just took it because I just loved the way he taught, and I had a better appreciation for American literature because of him than I would have had I not had him. So there was a group of traditional age students who decided to form not exactly a study group, because we weren't that. There was a room in Linthicum that was a little wedge-shaped room that nobody was using. And a young man named Sean Cohen found this out. Now, his mother was the head of, at Lyda Lee Tall, the daycare at Lyda Lee Tall.
Student daycare.
Yes, the student daycare. And then when they moved, I'm not sure if she's retired, and I can't think of her name.
Douthert. What's her first name?
Last name was Cohen.
His name is Cohen, but
hers is different. But her first name was
what's her name?
I don't remember.
It'll come to one of us.
It will. But nonetheless, Sean had.
She just retired, by the way, this past year.
I heard that. I think from Sean actually. Sean, by the time he took classes when he was in high school here, took classes and everything. He had over 200 hours, 220 or 240 something hours by the time he graduated. Only because he was another one that just loved it here. So he found this little room and drug furniture, couches and old Oriental rugs and stuff up from the basement of Linthicum into this room. And we would gather. And there was sort of a core group of us. And to this day, 17 years later, we are still friends. Facebook has helped a lot because we're all on Facebook. But we've remained friendly. We've been in each other's weddings, or I've been in me as the, they're now about the same age as I was when we started. They're in their early 40s. And but that was a wonderful group. Oh, and we would get into these raging arguments about, politics or or criticism. We would take a piece of literature and just rip it apart, and somebody would have one attitude and somebody would have something else. Faculty generally did not come in. Dr. Bem, he occasionally came in, and Duncan, yes,
At Duncan.
yes, he would come in. Those are the only two faculty members
That were brave enough.
Yeah, because it was, and then we had a girl that we called Coffee Girl, because she got a coffee pot and put the coffee pot in. She would make coffee for everyone, and I even call her CG to this day. Her name's Michelle, but but it was just a wonderful group of people with fertile minds, and we were all taking, I mean, which brings me to a point, remembering that I'm 20 years plus older than these students. At first, I was an anomaly, but once they realized that I was taking the same classes, the same tests, I didn't get a break from anybody because of my age, that I never missed a class, and I took excellent notes, and I would share them with anybody that needed them. And all of a sudden, the age difference fell away, because we were all in this boat together.
Right.
My age became unimportant. So then we would have these study groups together, and it's also the group that would say, "Oh, did you have Dr. So-and-so? Well, don't take him. He's real hard on, you know," or in the case of Dr. Kihm, which I guess I better tell about Dr. Kihm. I had a 4-point until I took her class, and it was the only B I got. My entire college career at Towson was from Charlotte Kihm.
And you worked for it.
I worked for that B. I thought I did A work, but apparently she did not. But it was sort of humbling and gratifying in the same sense. But of course, we shared this sort of thing at this English group. Now, some of them are going to be writers, like Patty McCartney. She was doing writing. Joel Tracy, he was going to go into education. He was taking education courses with me. Sean was doing literature and hypertext, and he was fine arts. His major was English and fine arts. So Kim Blackwell, her major was English and math. So it was a wonderful mix of people and ideas. And I would not trade those. Last week, when we were unable to do the interview, I walked by Linthicum, actually went in.
Oh.
Because I know.
Is it safe in there?
Oh, it is. They've got the health sciences in there now.
I know.
And so I took a picture of it and I posted it on Facebook. And I had something like 60 comments from all of these people reminiscing back to the time when they were here. So now you sort of see this love that's growing in me about this place, and it sneaks up on you. You know, it's insidious isn't the right word. It just does. It sort of sneaks up and grabs your soul. I'm taking education courses with all sorts of wonderful people, and yet I'm not sure I want to be a teacher. You know, I'm going to get the skills, but then I'm not sure. So I start taking education courses, and I'm confused because I'm taking English, and then I'm taking education, and of course this is secondary ed. So it's not actually geared. If I could be taking biology or math or whatever.
It's not specific to English.
It is not specific to English, which is bothersome, and I'm not sure if it still is, or I'm not sure how that works. But that if I could change things, I would change that. Because my methods class, in methods, I found yesterday, I went down and looked at my file, and I have a file for every course I ever took at Towson. And I pulled out my methods file, and I have a lesson plan for writing, a lesson plan for grammar, and a lesson plan for poetry. Now, if someone were a math major in that class, they would probably be writing lesson plans geared to
Geometry.
that. So I do not remember whether I chose those, but that was my only criticism. I'm not sure that we got out into the schools as often as we should early on.
Right.
I remember observing at Eastern Votech. I remember going there to observe, and I also remember going to Overley. I remember going to those 2 schools at some point for observation. I'm not.
Was there a purpose for your going? And was there an assignment you didn't teach? Or
We did not
anything?
teach. It was an observation class, and yes, we had to write something, I'm sure, to bring back. But some of the students that went for observation were allowed to help with the class. As I recall, what I did was just sort of sit in the back and watch what the teacher did to sort of give us an idea of what we would be doing. I think at that point, and again, this is the early 90s, there wasn't enough hands-on. And so, ask the question.
How were you feeling about this after these observations?
I think I was ambivalent. I think I didn't, I was just so excited to be getting an education. So at this point, it didn't dawn on me. And remember now, I have a husband who's making a fine living. I've got 2 children who are through college. So I'm sort of charmed here in that I can, I'm kind of spoiled. I'm not having to get this degree so that I can put food on the table or pay my rent.
Right.
So I'm being really cavalier about it. If it works out, fine. If it doesn't, but that doesn't mean that I didn't take it seriously, because I did. If I'm good, my mother always said, anything. Well, my motto is anything worth doing is worth overdoing. But my mother had a saying that I have carried with me my entire life: when a task is once begun, never leave it till it's done. Be the labor great or small, do it well or not at all. And I live that. I mean, if I'm going to do something, by gosh, I'll do it the best I can, even if I don't like doing it. But if I've committed to it, well, you got to see it through to the end, because Mother would be unhappy if I didn't. And it goes against that personality profile as well. So I was kind of ambivalent, and I wasn't loving my education courses. I honestly didn't feel like I was prepared. Like, if you are studying Beowulf, when you get done studying Beowulf, you can spout Beowulf and all sorts of things to everyone. I didn't feel when I took my education courses that I could tell someone how to teach. I thought, oh, there's more going on here, and I'm short. I don't have all the stuff I need yet. So then it came time, all the time that I was also in school, I also was having part-time jobs. So not only was I here, but I have too much energy to sit at home, and so I signed on to some part-time jobs. And some of the part-time jobs I had was, I worked in a pet shop. That was interesting. I worked in a flower shop, and these friends owned these, and so I just would help out at holidays and so on, or when they were short a person. And then I had a friend who I had worked with who did flea markets. And so on the weekends, I would pack up my little pickup truck, and I would take round racks and clothes and so on to a flea market in North Point and set it up, and he paid me $100 a day for Saturday, or $100 for Saturday, $100 for Sunday. And if I did more than $1,000 in sales, I got 10%. So if I did 120, I got $1,200. So it was fun, and it was, just fun money for me. And while I did that, I met he's a few years older than I am, a black man named Joseph Parker, and he and I became friends. He liked flea markets, and so he would come around to this flea market, and he and I started up a conversation. And I would have my books there to be studying, and of course he was curious. Well, it turns out he worked at Highlandtown Middle School in the city. So I said, I'm going to have to be student teaching, and I think I might want to come to your school. And he said, are you sure? And I said, yeah, I think I might. I said, I'm a grown-up. I'm not a 22-year-old. I'm 47 years old. So people complain about the city schools, but I want to really go see what's going on. And so he said, I can get you on there. Had a wonderful cooperating teacher there named Josephine Wilson, and lovely lady. And so I did. I signed up for my middle school experience at Highlandtown Middle, and my high school experience at Hereford. So, but before I got to that, the summer of 1994, I got a call from my brother. My mother was dying in Ohio. And I'm the oldest of 5, so it was only fitting that I go out and take care of her. And of course I was in school. All my 3 brothers and my sister all had jobs and young kids, and they couldn't. And I could because Connie was doing her little thing here at Towson, Connie's little fun thing. So I went out in June, and I was her hospice nurse until she died on September 4th. And only my mother would do this. She died on my anniversary because she knows I can't remember dates. I'm terrible at remembering dates. So, and that was a Sunday. The 5th was Labor Day, and I was supposed to start student teaching on the following day. But I had called Towson, and I had called them and told them that I would be unable because of my mother. And so they were very understanding. The school was very understanding. On that Tuesday I called them and I said, I have some good news and some bad news. The bad news is Mother died. The good news is, if you give me this week, I could start student teaching next Monday. And Towson could not have been more accommodating. Absolutely, that'll be fine. So I missed 4 days. And I started at Highlandtown Middle. I had 200 8th graders, 5 sections, 40 kids a section. But the truancy in the city schools is so high that I was lucky to ever have 25 students. Never did I have over 30, ever. And it was an unbelievably eye-opening experience. I would not trade those 6 weeks that I spent in that school for anything. The children were amazing. The staff was overworked, underpaid, horrible. The building was horrible. It was just, people complain about the city schools. Go down and see. You won't believe it. Where's the money going? That's a good question, because at that point, city schools were getting per student more money than the county. And you go and look at these beautiful county buildings, and then you go down and look at what these kids were dealing with, and something's not right there, and it'll take smarter people than I to figure that out. But I loved it. I did.
Now, when you started, was your cooperating teacher, did you sort of ease into teaching so that you were sort of helping at the beginning, and then she sort of turned it over to you gradually?
She did. Probably the first week, I observed her. And in the meantime, that gave me a chance to find out where they were in their curriculum. So then I could start my lesson plans, writing my lesson plans. And then I took over, and I had the class from then on. And I was delighted to do that because it was so much fun. These kids, the curriculum had them reading some book about family on the Eastern Shore. It was so foreign to these children. They had no more idea. I'm like, who picks this stuff? And they're like, well, this is what we have to teach. And I'm thinking, oh, I could find books really that these kids could relate to. It was frustrating in that sense. So I remember going to the fish market, and I had a cooler, and I got clams and crabs and oysters and all sorts of things, and I took it in, and that was part of my lesson plan. So these kids could see, they could smell it, they could see it, they could touch it, they could get an idea of what this book was about, this fishing family on the Eastern Shore. I don't even remember the name of the book, that's how unmemorable the book was. But it gave them a sense. Most of these kids hadn't been out of Baltimore City.
Right.
And they're supposed to read this book and get it about, well, if they didn't have an interest in it, I didn't have an interest in it. It was beyond that. So we did some fun stuff like that. I had some great students. There were students that were there that were extremely bright and were kind of caught up because they couldn't afford, their parents couldn't afford. I had a Vietnamese young man who was brilliant, but his parents couldn't afford to send him to a private school, so he had to be there. We made sure that he got everything he needed, as much when the class was all disruptive and so on, that we were focusing and he was getting everything he needed, because he definitely had a future. And to get him pulled down in the, I had one young man who made bail, and his mother threw a party for him. He had been arrested for armed robbery at one of the convenience stores, and he was just waiting until he had no intention of going through high school. And one day he stood up in class and he said, "Ms. K," they didn't know Miss Kihm, "Ms. K, anybody mess with you? You tell them come see Richard Harris. I got your back." And honestly, those children, I felt so safe down there. People said, "Oh, you're going in the city," and and I'm like, yes, these kids, if all they want was somebody to care about them, and they can tell a phony. I mean, they could spot a phony. I cared about them. I mean, to the point where I could have had a job there, of course, but there wasn't enough of me. I mean, when I think about what their lives and what they went through, I've told you the story, and I'll share it, about the Benton twins. Taisha and Naisha Benton were 8th graders, and I will say both of them, each one of those girls weighed 180 pounds or more. They were overweight, very quiet, shy girls, never caused any problems, and were chronically late. So Mrs. Wilson told me that the reason they were chronically late was that mother was a crack addict, and they had some aunts and uncles and grandparents, and people were trying to kind of care for these girls, but they were sort of at their own devices. And one day I was teaching class, and I had the class engaged, and once you had the class engaged, you couldn't, if you looked away, or if you answered the door, it was chaos. So I had the class engaged, and the door opens, and I see the Benton twins come in, and I said, "Taisha, take your seat up here. Naisha, there's your seat in the back." And I kept teaching, and I was calling on kids and so on. And the girls sit down, and she puts her book bag down, and I'm still teaching, and out of the corner of my eye, I see something crawling on the floor. A cockroach has crawled out of this young lady's book bag. So I can't stop and go, "Ooh, a cockroach," because again, chaos would have reigned. So I stepped on it. I stepped on 3 cockroaches that crawled out of that child's book bag. And then your heart says, how can I teach them English when this is what they're coming from? And so when I say there wasn't enough of me, you wanted to bring them all home. You seriously, you just couldn't believe it. When I left that school to go to Hereford for my high school experience, they gave me, and I still have it, I should have worn it today, I thought of that driving in. They gave me a cardigan sweater with the crest of Highlandtown Middle, and I still have it. And I had my photograph taken with every one of my classes. And I don't know where those are with the photographs that I sent you. I should find those because those are precious. But every one of those classes, they loved me. By the time I left, I loved them, they loved me. It was just, it was perfect. So then I went to, you finish your middle school, and now you're in high school. So I go out to Hereford, which is my neighborhood. We had moved to the country by this time from Cockeysville. And I have 2 classes, 17 gifted and talented seniors for English, and yearbook. Well, my cooperating teacher there was Lucy Eichler, lovely lady, chairman of the department, and she said, "I can't give you yearbook." I said, "I know, you can't give me yearbook. This isn't good. I mean, she's got to get a yearbook published. She can't turn it over to a student teacher who has no knowledge of yearbook." And the 17 gifted and talented seniors that I had for my English class were smarter than I. They were writing papers beyond what, but that I could deal with. I mean, the 17 gifted and talented seniors were okay. I could deal with them, and I did do well in that class. But the yearbook thing, so she says to me, after I'd been there a couple of days, she said, "You know what?" She said, "See that table over in the corner? There were 4 kids over there sitting," and she said, "The only reason they're in this class is because they thought it was easy, and they have no interest in yearbook at all. They're disruptive. They just are in here to cause a problem." And she said, "If you can take those 4 kids and let me run the rest of the class," she said, "that's what I need you to do for yearbook." And I said, "Suits me. 4 kids, are you kidding?" So I just come from 200. Let me make one more comment about Highlandtown Middle. When my first PTA meeting was a couple of weeks after I started. Out of 200 8th graders, I had 3 parents. So that was so telling to me. The 3 parents that came were quite engaged, but there were 3 out of 200. So I started with, so back to Hereford, I have these 4 kids, and I said, well, what do you think we could do here? And I don't know, all they wanted to do was like get high and get drunk and smoke, and I don't know, they just had really, they weren't engaged at all. And it was 2 boys and 2 girls. And the girls weren't so bad. One of the boys was really bad. But the other, there was one of the young men who was just as charming as he could be. Not a student, but just a charming, he had just a nice personality. The other young man, not so much, but Dustin, I really liked this kid. So I said, well, maybe we could do a page. Let's ask Mrs. Eichler if we 4 can't come up with, we 5 can't come up with a page that we can do for the yearbook. Because all these people are, and that was part of it, I think. These kids felt disenfranchised. They weren't the popular kids, and they weren't the smart kids, and they were the other. They were the rejects, and they've always been rejects. So yeah, of course we're going to be disruptive and so on. So when we had this idea for them to maybe do a page, they sort of got a little more engaged. So we asked Mrs. Eichler, and yes, and they came up with, the kids did, no bus for us. And I remember this is Hereford High School out in the middle. It's the largest area of any public high school, maybe in the state. I know in Baltimore County for sure. It goes from Schwann Road to the Pennsylvania line and then both sides of the county. But the smallest student population. So this no bus for us was how do students get to Hereford High School? So they're in the middle of the page, they had a school bus with the circle and the line through it. And then they took photographs of how different kids got to school. And I don't know that anybody ever really drove a tractor, but they took a picture of a kid on a tractor and somebody riding a horse. And they just had all of these wonderful pictures of how, and so they made this great page. And that was an extremely rewarding experience because one, I helped her by dealing with these kids. And for another, it sort of got them, they became a part of it. They got into it. They were doing typesetting and, coming up with fonts and colors and, they really did. It really was a wonderful experience. This young man, Dustin, though, he touched me particularly. And he said to me, he said, Mrs. Kihm, if I graduate from high school, I will be the first male in my family to graduate from high school. I said, Dustin, if you graduate from high school, I'm going to be there. Now, I'm doing my student teaching in the fall, and of course, he's not supposed to graduate until May. So, and I'm due to graduate from Towson in January. Actually, January 8th, 1995, I remember that date.
Very well.
Yes. So I promised him that I would do that. And so after I graduated, I had been offered a teaching job for the following year at Hereford, in their English department. And I was debating. I was real ambivalent. And I immediately after graduation did a long-term substitution for Lucy Eichler, who was going out for surgery. She had planned this, and she said, oh, you're perfect. You know the kids, you know the curriculum, you know where we've not been since you were here in the fall. This will be great. So I did a long-term sub-assignment for her.
And when did you do that? Did you after you graduated in January?
In January, and then that was that semester from January till
June.
Oh no, it wasn't that long. I think maybe till March, till she came back in March.
She came back.
But then when she came back, that was fine because Hereford liked me as a sub, so I kept subbing. And I taught an ag class. That was hilarious. And I mean, wherever they needed me, it was such a small school, so all the students ended up knowing who I was. I was very comfortable there. But something told me that teaching wasn't where I belonged. In the meantime, George Friedman is telling me that teaching is exactly where you belong. He said, you need to do this. And, but I think I was frightened by the preps.
Oh, yes.
Yes. I mean, there's got to be a way that by the time you graduate from college, you've at least got something to start with. And you don't. I didn't. And I'm thinking, for just substituting or my long-term I was spending every night, every weekend. I mean, I said, this is going to take 3 years till I get a filing cabinet full of preps for these, you know, and I was real good at lesson plans. I mean, I think they're important. I know there are teachers probably that don't use them, but I needed them. And in the beginning, you've got, otherwise, it's your roadmap.
Right.
So I think that's what frightened me, was that I was 49 years old, and I'm thinking, this is not, I don't know if I want to work that hard. Mm-hmm. That, again, I don't know that I'm willing to put that in at this stage of life.
And you had that choice.
And I did have that choice. I was, yes, afforded that choice, generously afforded that choice. So I continued to sub that fall, the fall of '95. Okay. I did. I said, I don't want to come here full time, but I will keep subbing.
And you were at Hereford in the fall as well?
Yes, I stayed at Hereford. And come January of '96, I got a call from that same person who hired me at Hutzler's all those years ago. She was now a merchandise manager at Joseph A. Bank, a men's clothing chain, a national men's clothing chain, based in Hampstead, Maryland. And she said, I need a planner. Would you be interested? And I said, yes, I would. Mm-hmm. That would be right down my alley. Mm-hmm. Because that's a 9 to 5. Mm-hmm. Again, no salaried job is ever 9 to 5. And it was something that I knew. It was something comfortable. I could go back to it. I knew it. Teaching, remember teaching for me was a new field. Even at I had worked all my life.
Right.
But not with those skills. Uh-huh. So that would have, and I could have failed. You know, plus the other thing that always bothered me about teaching was, and I don't think 22-year-olds think about this, but I sure did, I could really goof up somebody's life. You know, kids are so fragile. What if I do something that, you know, they're scarred forever?
They're pretty resilient too.
But that was, I mean, I really, that impressed me. I was nervous about that. I thought, oh, you know, when you're 22, you don't think you're going to goof up a kid's life. You only think about that when you're in your 40s. So anyway, I did. I went back to Joseph Bank. And then, of course, I couldn't sub anymore because I'm working full-time there. Right. And I worked there for 12 years. And during this time, I had an instance where I was in California on a business trip. And I was visiting one of the Joseph Bank stores in California. And there was a gentleman, a customer in the store. And he was an elderly gentleman who had years before been in the garment industry in New York. And he and I struck up a conversation. I'm not shy, and I do talk to people a lot. I talk a lot, and he was asking me about, you know, how I got to work for Joseph Bank and so on, and I told him about my hiatus of going to college at Towson and getting my teaching degree, and then coming back to retailing. Right. And he said to me, "Of course you did, my dear. You have lint in your veins." And I think that's just wonderful that I have lint in my veins. And so I worked there for 12 years and then retired 5 years ago, and now I'm still very connected to Towson. I served on the alumni board. I'm an ex facto member of the alumni board. I am a committee chair.
And tell us a little bit about what you did as a member of the alumni board. What kinds of things did that involve?
Well, first, the alumni board is a group of alums that are volunteers who have the best interest of the university at heart. So they are involved in fundraising and in a liaison. I kind of think there's a liaison job between the university and the alumni, and that the alumni board should try to bridge that gap between the students and the staff here and then the alumni on the outside, because you sort of think of it as an inside-outside thing. That,
right.
You know, and so the alumni board's allowed in, and and they can sort of get the word out to everyone that's graduated. And so when I started, I didn't even know there was an alumni board. I got a call from Lori Armstrong, and she said, would I be interested? And I said, well, I don't even know what that is. And so she explained, and that we, meet 4 times a year, and the activities of the alumni board and so on, as far as scholarship, community outreach, legislative connection, SGA connection. So, and I said, oh, that sounds, I would be willing to give time to that. And so the first couple of meetings, she announced that I and another gentleman would be co-chairs of the Towson Advocacy Program. And I'm like, what? she thought she had asked me before, but she hadn't. And and so I then became chair of the Towson Advocacy Program, TAP, and that is it's a grassroots organization that liaises between the university. We advocate for higher education for the state of Maryland, Towson in particular. And so I'm in Annapolis a lot when the General Assembly's in session. I am constantly writing, calling, emailing the governor, my state delegates. Not so much, this is more a state, this is state,
right, because
we need the funding here. I come armed with lots of factoids, and I spout them at whim. Every time I'm around any kind of a legislator in Annapolis, they look and see me coming and goes, oh no, here she comes again. She's going to start telling us how great Towson is. But we are. If you think that this university graduates more education majors, more undergrad business majors, and more undergrad healthcare professionals than any other school in this state, we are now the economic engine that healthcare, business, and education. Who more does this state need than us? Well, so that
and a high percentage of students actually do stay in state. That's another thing.
Even the ones that come from out of state.
Yes,
yes,
they do.
They do. They stay here, and so we are so important to the state of Maryland. Now, my current crusade, and this is not sanctioned by the Alumni Association, but is to get a Towson alum on the Board of Regents. Currently, we are the second largest state university in the state, and we have no representation on the Board of Regents. We had 2 and a student regent, and both of their terms were up and they're gone. And so that is my latest crusade, because I think it's, and the reason for that is that, since I'm not assuming everybody understands this, the General Assembly passes the governor's budget with how much money is going to go to higher education. But then that amount of money is placed before the Board of Regents, and they're the ones that decide College Park will get this much, Towson will get this much. Well, I'm not sure we're getting our fair share, and I'm not sure Towson has ever gotten its fair share. In the entire time I've been associated with this university, they keep asking Towson to do less, and they do, and then and they do. So they'll say, well, we're not going, no raises for 3 years, and they're like, okay, or cut back on staffing, and they do, and Towson continues to keep their numbers up and their retention rates up and their graduation rates up. And so as long as that goes on, why would we change? Well, it's getting to a crunch time, I think. And I'll do anything. I mean, and why do I do this? Because I will never be able to give back to this school what it gave to me in terms of self-esteem. And just to give you a little aside on the self-esteem issue, I always felt very embarrassed about going to any kind of function. I mean, my husband had a good job, and we would oftentimes have social functions, and the women would be talking about what sorority they were in or what college they went to and so on. And here I had this very successful retail career, but I didn't go to college, and that just ate at me. I had a hard time. And so when Jim had his 40th college reunion in, well, let's see, he graduated in '68, so 2008. We went back to Miami University, and we stayed in a dorm, and we had functions with all these, went to all the functions, and I felt proud. I could say, and Jim would say, oh, and Connie's an alum of Towson, and I could go. When he went to his 25th, I didn't go.
You didn't?
No, he went alone. He went alone to his 25th because I had nothing in common with them. And that's funny because when I was preparing for this and looking through some of my college papers, I ran across Langston Hughes' poem, A Dream Deferred. And I thought, that was it. That dream was deferred, but fortunately, I got it before it became, it exploded. It became,
right.
Yeah, so that's why I give back. That's the reason, is that I will fight for this school. I will do whatever they ask me, I will do. We have supported them financially. We've been giving, I have a little funny story about that. I hadn't been out very long. I graduated in January of 95. So maybe 96 or 97, they had got an invitation to go to Hidden Waters, where at that time it was Donald Langenberg that lived there. He was the Chancellor, right.
Of the whole system.
Right, and that's where he lives. And Hoke Smith was the president here. And there was a woman named Joanne, and I don't remember her last name, who was like his chief of staff.
Glasser,
that's right.
Glasser. Yes, Joanne Glasser.
Yes, she's now provost of Tennessee.
She's a president, and where is she now? We try to keep up with her, but I think she's had a couple of presidencies now.
Oh, good. Well, she was sort of his provost or chief of staff or whatever.
She was.
And so we get invited to this event. And so Jim and I go to the event, and I've been out of college now a couple of years, and I'm feeling real good about Towson, and isn't it nice they're inviting me to this thing? And we're gathered in this foyer, and Dr. Smith Hoke is in welcoming all of the people, and Joanne had introduced him and said, you're a special group of people. Dr. Smith would like to, thank you all for coming and so on. So he starts his speech and says, you are a special group of people. You are all people who have donated $1,000 or more to the university in the last year. And my husband's standing next to him, and I feel him go like this, and I stiffen, and he looks at me, and I look at him, and he goes, did you give him $1,000? I said, no, did you? He said, no. I said, Jim, they've made a terrible mistake. He said, how much did you give him? I said, I think I gave him $100. And so so I was telling this to the girls yesterday too. I said, oh my gosh, we've just eaten all this food. They think we've given $1,000, we've given $100, we've probably eaten $100 worth of food. So we went out in the garden and we're thinking, well, what should we do? I don't know what. So I said, well, we'll go home and check. And so we go home and check, and no, it was really $100, but then I felt so bad I did give him $1,000. So, which I said later was, what a good ploy. This wasn't dumb. And actually, I was invited because I was one of those young, everyone else had given $1,000. The people that had only been out had graduated.
Right.
Yes, that's why.
Just a few years.
Yes. And so, but that was funny. That was funny. But that started our philanthropy. So when I talk, and I will have a breakfast for faculty and staff that are alums, but actually I think anybody can come the beginning of January prior to the legislative session. And I have speakers, and at the end of it though, I ask for physical support, go to Annapolis, write your congressman, that sort of thing, and fiscal. Give. Even if, give to your means. If you can give $10,000, give it. But if you can give 10, give 10. Give whatever you can according to your means. I don't think anybody, I don't think you get judged by what you give, just that you do. And I always give that speech to as many people as I can, that it's not, it's not how much, it's just that you stay connected and that you're helping out. So it's been a wonderful ride. I wouldn't have changed a thing. Well, maybe Charlotte Coombe-John's grade.
And now she's gone, so you can't.
She is, and I went to her memorial service because
I remember.
Yes, because even getting that B.
Right.
There was something nice about that, and I took the paper that she wrote.
Right.
She wrote me.
I remember.
And read it at her memorial service.
She was tough.
She was
But
tough.
you felt like you really earned that B.
I did.
And that was probably meant that you were an above average student, which is what B used to mean.
Yes. I probably got by on grade inflation because I showed up. Well, 90.
No, I doubt that.
90% of life is showing up.
Well, that's true.
And I
if
did.
If you don't show up, can't do anything.
I also had a nice experience with Sarah Coulter. I took several classes from her, and I liked her a lot. And after I had the message that my mother was dying, I was in school, and I took a midterm right after I got the news, and it was abysmal. She called me in. She said, "This isn't your work," and I broke down, and I just cried. She called me into her office. She said, "This is not what you normally do," and I said, "Well, I just got the news that my mother has lung cancer and is dying," and she said, "Well, I knew there was something." Now, where else what other school would anybody even care? But she did. She sent me to the counseling service, and I went, and it was most helpful. I would find myself, I would get my homework done or whatever papers I had to write or things I had to read, and I would find myself at my computer at 3 and 4 in the morning playing Hearts or Solitaire or something, just so I didn't have to think. But she spotted that, and I think I did much better on my final. But think about, I mean, that's, and then people say, well, why Towson? Oh my gosh, don't even ask. I will start spouting off why Towson.
Before we move away from your advocacy for Towson and your generosity, would you tell us a little bit about some of your recent philanthropy in terms of the new College of Liberal Arts building?
Well,
it's very hard to sort of tell your own story when you've been generous, but...
Well, except I was happy about doing this. When they were building the new College of Liberal Arts, Gary Rubin came and asked me. He didn't ask me. I asked him. I said, are they going to have any, will there be any chances? Because I had seen rooms named in the new Fine Arts building. And I said, are we going to do that for the College of Liberal Arts? And he said, yes, absolutely. And I said, well, then, how much are they? Because I want to do one. And he said, well, that's very nice. And so he told me an amount, and I said, okay. And that would be all right, because at that point, my husband's company matched everything we gave. So it was awfully nice. It was a collaboration between me and my husband's firm, Beckman Dickinson. They shared half. So because I had a favorite professor, Dr. George Friedman, I didn't want my name on there. I wanted his name on the room, because he's retired now. But I will never forget the joy, and that is the best thing the joy of being in his classes, and the absolute joy. Actually, I was the speaker for graduation, for my graduation, and I didn't have a 4-point, and so people say, well, how could you be? I'm sure people had 4 points. Yes, they did, but I was the highest grade point average that had matriculated all 4 years here. So if you had transferred in, you weren't considered. So I had the highest grade point average of somebody matriculating. And that whole speech was about joy. It was about the joy of when you were here, when you were going through school, the joy of the moment that we were graduating, and then the future joy of when we go out into the world with whatever. Because I said, when I started, I said, I can't get up here and give a speech about my future lies ahead, because I'm already looking at the back door. And
well, not quite.
Not exactly, but so Dr. Friedman was part of that as well, because in that speech I gave a nod. He was sitting on the stage, and one of the lines was, the joy of a professor that can keep an 8 o'clock class awake. And I looked at him because he was the one. So when we decided to donate the classroom, there was no doubt. And the good news was that we donated the money, and then they let us pick it out. So we got to pick out the good one, which I think is probably more than the amount of money we gave, but it was okay. They can afford it, since we were the first. And then last year they asked if I would fund a scholarship for the Distinguished Alumni and Dean's Recognition scholarship, and help fund, not the whole thing, but help fund. And 3 of us stepped up, and we donated enough money to start a scholarship fund for those. I was the Dean's Recognition Award winner in 2010. And so I donated to that.
Very nice.
Yes, and I also received the Spirit of the University Award, and I don't remember when that was. I think maybe 2004. I think 2004. Yeah, so the university has recognized me, and so that makes me even want to give more. I just wish I were like a big old millionaire that I could say. I would love to save the baseball and soccer. If I wish I had more money, because I would. But I think time, and you also notice that all through this, my husband has been a part of this all the time that I've been donating, and like we were invited to the President's Box for the football game last Saturday, and Jim comes along because his school is so many miles, 400 miles away, and he would be involved in his school were it closer. But he's sort of become an honorary Towson alum.
Absolutely.
Just by supporting me. And I think that's really special. I mean, he's part of it as well. And it's been good. We just bought season tickets to football, men's and women's basketball, men's and women's lacrosse, and gymnastics. They had a sale. And I'm a sucker for a sale. I'm a retailer, remember? I'm a retailer. And $180, and you got season tickets to all this. But yeah,
that's a good deal.
That was a good deal. So we did that. And future, I can't see me becoming less involved than I am now. I mean, even if like my TAP, if I quit doing TAP, the Towson Advocacy Program, I know that the education, the College of Education and the College of Liberal Arts, I'm sure there are places I could volunteer there.
Forever.
Yes, I'm sure of that. And I will. As long as I am able, Towson will, because again, I'm trying to pay back that debt, and it's a big one.
Thank you. Do we have time for one more question?
We are at less than 2 minutes, actually 1 minute, but that's just on the tape, so we've got the card, so we can probably get it.
Would you like to say something about what you would say to young people who are considering a career in education? That was the last question.
Yes, and that's a good question.
It is a good question, especially for somebody who said at this point in time in your life, that was just not a good fit for you. So I would love for you to be able to talk about that. Can we do that?
Go ahead, yeah.
Yes, and my advice would be experience it. Don't think growing up all your life, I want to be a teacher, I want to be a teacher. Experience it as often as you can. Volunteer in a classroom, volunteer for a Girl Scout troop or a church group or anywhere where there are young people where you're going to be around young people, guiding them or in a mentorship kind of role. And then when you get to college, and fortunately, from what I hear, the education classes, the education curriculum has changed so that there is more exposure starting early on. So then you'll know if this is for you, and because it takes heart. It's not a job; it's a lifestyle. It's a career. A teacher doesn't. A teacher gives of themselves. That's what I said about Highlandtown Middle. I knew there wasn't enough of me. And I hated that there wasn't enough of me. But it takes heart, it takes dedication, it takes long hours in the beginning. Now, the good news about that is, though, after you've taught for a while, you have these preps. You can go to that filing cabinet and say, oh, I'm teaching Romeo and Juliet, and you pull out that prep, and you've got those lesson plans that you've done. And yes, you tweak them depending on the class. But it's hard work in the beginning, and it's probably hard work all along. The other thing that advice-wise, is don't ever take it for granted and don't ever burn out. Don't ever just do it by rote. That there has to be some spark in there, that you touch that kid. And the other advice for young people is, that's the rewards that you get. When Dustin Colehep graduates from high school and is the first one in his family that ever does, and you go to his graduation and he sees you there because you promised him that if he did, you'd be there, that makes it worth it. And just think, I wasn't even his teacher for the whole year. So the rewards are great if you're willing to give the time and put your heart into it. But I don't think it's something you can fake. I think it has to come from within you. And do I think I had it? Yeah, I do. 20 years prior, I think I would have been a great teacher. I think it was just, in my case, it was my time in life. I was almost 50 years old. And putting in that effort, 23 to 25 is a lot different from 50 to 53. So, and I think that's about the best advice I can give.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. This is great fun. I mean, who doesn't like talking about themselves? And I do have kind of an interesting, you know.
Oh, you do?
Oh, yeah.
Unique.
Lint in my veins.
Lint in your veins.
Yes.